The Siberian tiger appeared without sound. One moment, the forest beyond the frozen river was empty, silent, except for the wind threading through bare branches, and the next, a massive shape emerged from the snow like a shadow given weight. The wind seemed to carry it forward, curling around the animal's muscular frame, lifting the fine hairs along its back in slow, deliberate waves. The rangers froze, weapons half raised, fingers trembling against the triggers. Their breaths hung in the cold air, each exhale a fragile mist that vanished almost instantly. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The tiger coat burned a vivid orange against the white world, streaked with black stripes like a living brushstroke on snow. Frost clung to his fur, forming jagged crystals along his ears, muzzle, and tail. Steam curled from his nostrils as he inhaled the frigid air, each breath deliberate, careful, almost ceremonial. He was enormous, old, scarred, a king who had survived countless winters, the forest and the frozen rivers having both tested him and forged him into legend. And he was walking directly toward Yuri Mikhailov. Yuri did not run. At 69 years old, his knees protested each step, his lungs burned in the cold, and his hand shook as he tightened his grip on the wooden staff he had carried for nearly 2 decades. Not a rifle, not a taser, a staff that had been his companion through blizzards, storms, and decades of solitude. The same staff, the same forest, the same snow. He felt the crunch of ice beneath his boots, but the sound was muted compared to the soft whisper of snow under the tiger's massive paws. Each step was deliberate, each movement measured. He could feel the power coiled in Zima's shoulders, the quiet patience of a predator who had never once underestimated the forest or the humans who dared enter it. The tiger's amber eyes, bright and piercing even against the snow, locked onto him. And for a moment, the world fell away. There was no wind, no trees, no frozen river. Just the gaze of a creature that remembered. 3 heartbeats passed. 4. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then a 5th. The rangers shouted, finally breaking the stillness. "Move back," one yelled, voice cracking. "Step away, Yuri. Step back." Their weapons raised, fingers white against the triggers, the metallic click of safety switches audible in the frozen air. Protocol screamed danger. They had been trained for this, drilled endlessly in simulations where human lives were weighed against the need to protect both man and beast. But Yuri did not move. Instead, he lifted the staff slowly, horizontally across his body. It was a gesture of peace, a gesture of recognition. His voice, low and steady, barely carried over the whistling wind. "Zima," he said, "I am here." The name seemed to hang in the air, a bridge spanning 20 years. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the tiger halted. The muscles in his shoulders relaxed, but not fully. He lowered his head, nostrils flaring, ears twitching ever so slightly. The forest itself seemed to notice, snowflakes drifting down slowly as if the world were leaning in, waiting. Yuri felt his own heartbeat slow, matching the rhythm of the predator before him. The staff trembled not from fear, but from memory. Each scar, each stripe on Zima's body, spoke of winters survived, of battles fought, of life and death balanced delicately. The rangers whispered among themselves. Some dared to move closer. Others remained frozen, uncertain, their eyes wide as they witnessed what no human had expected. A wild Siberian tiger, feared across the Emmer, standing peacefully before a man. The wind shifted. A flurry of snow swirled around Zima's paws, lifting tiny crystals into the air like sparks. His whiskers caught the light of the pale winter sun, each vibration seeming to sense the smallest movement of the world. Yuri inhaled sharply, feeling the cold fill his lungs, but he did not step back. He did not flinch. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, Zima crouched slightly, resting the weight of his massive frame against the snow. He sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, ears flicking toward the forest, then back at Yuri. It was not aggression. It was acknowledgement, recognition, a memory stretching across decades and silent winters. Yuri whispered again, softer this time, a name that had survived poachers, storms, and time itself. Zima. The tiger amber eyes held his, unwavering. The world was still. The frozen river glimmered like glass. Trees bowed under the weight of snow. The rangers, trained and prepared, lowered their weapons ever so slightly, uncertainty etched in their faces. Somewhere, deep within the forest, a branch snapped. Zima head flicked toward it, muscles taut. But the memory of the man before him, the man who had cared, who had stayed, who had survived his own storms anchored him. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he took another step toward Yuri. The snow compressed beneath his paws, and the winter air seemed to exhale in relief. And so the tiger came forward, silent, immense, a storm-given form, a legend walking on ice and frost toward the man who had once whispered in snow-covered nights, teaching him trust. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching. Yuri had not come to the Primorsky Krai to save animals. He had come to disappear. After 30 years as a forestry engineer, after a life built on maps, timber reports, and calculations, Yuri's own life felt empty. A collapsed marriage, a son who no longer returned his calls, a city that no longer felt like home. He was a man with nowhere to go but inward, and somewhere to vanish. The wildlife rehabilitation station by the Amur River was the perfect refuge. Remote, unforgiving, cold. The kind of place where humans were measured not by their words but by their endurance. Winters there were merciless. Temperatures plunged below -30, and the wind howled through the trees with a voice like glass scraping over steel. Snow piled high on rooftops, blanketing the world in silence, isolating the few hardy souls who had chosen or been forced to live there. The work was brutal. Traps to dismantle, wounded animals to care for, sick cubs too small to survive without intervention. Food was scarce, fuel scarcer, and warmth a daily negotiation. Pay? Non-existent. Solitude? Absolute. It suited Yuri perfectly. That winter, they brought in a tiger cub, found alongside its dead mother, caught in a poacher wire snare. The tiny creature trembled, a bundle of fur coated in blood and frostbite, eyes wide with fear and fury. Its cries were sharp, a raw, piercing sound that echoed off the snowed-in walls. The other staff tried to soothe it, but it lunged, hissed, and lashed with claws that could barely pierce the soft enclosure wood. The cub was malnourished, starved, and utterly alone. They called him Zima, after the storm that had arrived that same night, sweeping across the frozen land with relentless ferocity. No one could get close, except Yuri. He did not rush the cub. He did not force contact. He sat outside the enclosure for hours, sometimes entire nights, bundled in threadbare furs, snow piling around his boots and shoulders. He whispered to it, a low, steady voice, not loud enough to startle but persistent enough to be heard. Sometimes he left small pieces of his coat near the fence so the cub would learn his scent. The tiger sniffed, growled, swiped, then gradually ignored the fabric, and eventually, the man. Weeks passed. Snow turned to ice and back again. Frozen nights gave way to dawns where the river reflected a pale, red sun. Slowly, the cub fear turned to curiosity. Its growls softened. Its leaps became playful, exploratory, guided by the invisible thread of trust that Yuri spun each day. Months passed, and Yuri introduced the wooden staff not as a weapon, but as a boundary, a signal. When the cub lunged too aggressively or playfully, Yuri raised the staff horizontally, eyes steady, voice calm. The gesture was enough. Zima recoiled just a fraction, learning limits without fear. Yuri himself learned limits, too. The cub tested him, and through the testing, he remembered patience. He remembered care. He remembered how it felt to hold something fragile and broken and help it grow. When Zima was finally released into the protected reserve, Yuri stood at the edge of the forest, watching the snow melt around his boots. The young tiger paused once, looked back over its shoulder, and disappeared into the trees. Yuri whispered into the icy wind, "Live. That is enough." And for the first time in years, he felt a quiet settling inside him. A life saved, a bond formed, a storm survived. The tiger before him was Zima, grown into legend. Scars crisscrossed his muzzle, evidence of battles with humans, rivals, and the merciless winter. His movements were slower now, but deliberate, measured, like a king who had survived long enough to become a ghost. Rangers spoke of him in hushed tones, a creature of myth that stalked the forest with the patience of ice forming on a river. And yet, here he was. Zima lowered his massive head, nostrils flaring, whiskers trembling in the cold. Yuri stood perfectly still, the staff shaking slightly in his grip, not from fear, but from memory. Every scar, every stripe on Zima's enormous body, was a story he had witnessed unfold decades ago. Slowly, impossibly, the tiger stepped closer, then closer still, until Yuri could see frost clinging to the fine hairs along his whiskers, tiny crystals glittering in the winter sun like frozen stars. The tiger eyes, amber and liquid, seemed to search Yuri's face, scanning for the man he once knew, the one who had fed him, guided him, taught him patience. And then, with astonishing gentleness, Zima closed his teeth around the end of the wooden staff. Not biting, holding. The rangers stared, mouths agape. Some took a step back. Others lowered their rifles, uncertain whether they were witnessing a miracle or a hallucination in the freezing air. "You remember?" Yuri whispered, voice breaking slightly, mist freezing on his cheeks. The tiger released the staff and sat heavily in the snow, tail curling around his massive frame. He looked at Yuri not as prey, not as threat, but as something familiar, something human, something that had cared enough to stay. One of the rangers whispered, "He injured." Indeed, dark blood stained the fur along Zima's flank. A shallow but angry wound that had become infected. Yuri did not hesitate. He dropped to his knees in the snow, careful not to startle the animal. His hands moved with the precision of decades spent tending forests, repairing life, nurturing growth. When he cleaned the wound with antiseptic, Zima tensed but did not retreat. He trusted the man before him. Trust is not loud. It is stillness. It is patience. When the work was done, Zima pressed his massive forehead against Yuri's chest briefly. Warmth met cold, fur met clothing, and a bond stretched across decades and winters. Then, slowly, the tiger turned toward the forest. At the tree line, he paused once more, looking back with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of all his years. And then he vanished into the silent wilderness. No one spoke for long moments. Snowflakes fell, drifting between humans and legend alike. The wind whispered through bare branches, carrying away the remnants of an encounter that would live in memory forever. Some say Zima was never seen again. Others whisper that he moved deeper into the northern forests, away from human eyes, surviving as only a creature like him could, proud, wild, and untamed. Yuri returned home that spring. He planted trees along the riverbank near his village, each sapling a quiet testament to life endured and care given. When his son finally returned for a visit, Yuri spoke of the tiger, of forgiveness, of memory, of the bonds that survive time, distance, and silence. And on certain winter mornings, when snow fell just right, Yuri swore he could see enormous paw prints along the frozen river leading nowhere, and yet everywhere. The forest swallowed Zima once more. Yuri watched the massive tiger vanish between the birch and fir, a phantom among shadows. The rangers whispered theories. Some said the wound would finish him. Others believed he would recover and vanish deeper into the northern wilderness, as tigers do when age and survival dictate their path. For days after, Yuri could not shake the image of Zima amber eyes. They haunted him like embers left after a long winter fire, warm, burning, alive. He thought of the cub he had first held in his heart, of all the nights he spent in snow and silence, whispering to a creature too young and too afraid to understand care. That cub had grown into a legend, and somehow, despite the years and battles, it had remembered him. The wound was deep, but it was not fatal. The forest, harsh as it was, gave Zima the solitude he needed to heal. Wolves roamed nearby, birds flitted through the branches, and the river ran hard and cold, but Zima's instincts were sharp, honed over 2 decades of survival. He hunted, he rested, he avoided humans. He became, in every sense, a ghost of the Siberian taiga, unseen, respected, and untouchable. Yuri returned to his work at the station. The rangers remained wary, speaking in quiet tones about what they had witnessed. Many doubted that any tiger could behave like that toward a human, let alone an old cub rehab man who had left him years ago. But Yuri knew. He had always known. Trust, once earned, never fully vanished. It waits, patient as the snow, ready to return at the first heartbeat of recognition. Sometimes, late in the night, Yuri would sit by the edge of the frozen river, looking into the dark forest. He could feel Zima there, somewhere, his massive presence hidden among the trees, moving silently across the snow. And Yuri would whisper, as if the wind could carry the words, "Live." And somehow, he imagined the reply in a deep rumble, felt rather than heard. The pulse of a life survived, a life remembered. The forest remained both barrier and sanctuary. Humans did not dare enter where Zima roamed. The story spread among rangers and villagers. Tracks the size of dinner plates, a shadow that moved without sound, a roar that rolled across the valleys and vanished before it touched anyone. Zima became more than a tiger. He became a symbol of resilience, memory, and the wildness that refuses to be tamed. Yet for Yuri, the tiger was never a story or a legend. He was a friend, a reminder that care and patience leave marks deeper than any scar. Spring came slowly to the Primorsky Krai. The snow melted in layers, revealing the dark, rich soil underneath, and rivers swelled with the thaw. Yuri returned to his small village by the riverbank. He planted trees along the edge, tender saplings whose roots would one day stretch deep into the earth, just as his own memories reached into the decades past. His son finally came to visit one afternoon. They had been estranged for years, words unspoken and moments missed. But here, among the young trees and the sound of running water, silence became a bridge. Yuri told him about Zima, the tiger he had once nurtured. Not the sensationalized version of tracks and claws, but the quiet, patient story. A cub too afraid to trust, a man too old to hope, and the bond that grew in the frozen winter nights. He spoke of forgiveness, not just the tiger, but his own. The forgiveness he had offered himself for a life of mistakes and absences. His son listened, hesitant at first, then captivated. The story was simple, yet it carried a weight neither words nor time could diminish. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching. Yuri worked each day in the spring sun, planting, pruning, caring for life. The river sparkled with reflection, trees grew slowly taller, and the wind whispered through the branches as if carrying a secret. And sometimes, in the quiet of the morning, he swore he could see enormous paw prints along the frozen river leading nowhere. And yet everywhere at once. He often imagined Zima, old and wise, walking among the northern forests. Perhaps the tiger had found peace. Perhaps he wandered still. But Yuri no longer felt longing or sadness. He had known him, he had touched the wild, had earned trust, had shared something that defied words. In the evenings, when the sun dipped low, painting the river gold, Yuri would sit against a tree with the wooden staff that had guided him through so many winters. And in that stillness, he could feel Zima's presence, a reminder that some bonds endure beyond time, beyond distance, beyond life itself. And somewhere in the wind, in the shadow of the birch trees, perhaps in the frost along the riverbank, the tiger memory lingered. A silent guardian, a legend of the Siberian wilderness, and a friend who had never forgotten. Winter had settled deeply over Primorsky Krai, cloaking the forests and rivers in thick layers of snow and ice. Yuri walked slowly along the edge of the river, staff in hand, his breath visible in the frigid air. The trees he had planted years ago now stood tall, their roots digging deep into the frozen soil, silent witnesses to time passing and life persisting. Though Zima had vanished months ago, Yuri often felt his presence in the forest, the soft brush of wind against his face, the occasional rustle of distant trees, the faint traces of enormous paw prints in the snow. Memories of the tiger returned with startling clarity, bringing warmth to the cold solitude. And then, unexpectedly, he saw movement. A shadow shifted through the birches, massive and deliberate. Zima, older, scarred, slower, yet undeniably commanding. His amber eyes met Yuri across the snow. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the wind itself holding its breath. Zima approached carefully, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the cold air. When he pressed his enormous head against Yuri's chest, it was a gesture of recognition, of memory, and of trust. The tiger body radiated warmth and strength, even as age and scars marked him as a survivor. Yuri's hands rested gently on Zima's fur, feeling the heartbeat of the wild and the enduring bond they had forged decades ago. They remained like that for long minutes, neither speaking, yet communicating more than words could convey. Zima, the once fierce cub, had grown into a legendary creature of the taiga, and Yuri, the quiet guardian of the forest, had grown into a man who understood patience, respect, and the true meaning of care. Finally, Zima lifted his head, eyes scanning the forest, ever watchful, ever free. He lingered for a heartbeat, looked once more at Yuri, then silently melted into the trees. The tiger was gone, but the presence lingered, echoing in the paw prints pressed into the snow, in the rustle of branches, in the river icy murmur. Yuri knelt to trace the prints with his staff, feeling the rhythm of a life lived fully, fiercely, and freely. He did not feel sorrow, only a quiet completion. Trust, he realized, was not fleeting. It endured across years, across distance, across the boundary between human and wild. As dusk fell, Yuri sat on the riverbank, watching the snow swirl in the fading light. Somewhere out there, Zima prowled the endless forest, carrying with him the bond of their shared winters, their patience, and their understanding. Yuri knew that in the wind, in the snow, and in the whispering forests, Zima's spirit would always be near. A reminder that life, trust, and memory are eternal even in the harshest winters. And Yuri, wrapped in his coat, staff beside him, felt a quiet peace. Some stories do not end. They echo, endlessly, in the heart of the wild.